Yeah, colon cancer is still the second leading cause of cancer death. It kills more people every year than breast cancer, kills more people every year than prostate cancer. So it's a major problem, and the tragedy of every colon cancer death is that it could have been prevented, because if we catch these cancers early, or if we catch the colon polyps that can become the colon cancers, we can prevent anybody from ever dying of this disease. It's only when the disease is in its later stages, when it's spread outside the colon, that it becomes incurable, particularly if it's spread beyond the lymph nodes that surround the colon. So colonoscopy is absolutely the gold standard for preventing colon cancer by catching it either early or catching the colon polyps that can give rise to it. And the current guidelines are that everybody should have a colonoscopy when they hit 45. If they're at higher risk for cancer because they've had a family member with the disease, or because they have colitis or some other types of similar illnesses, they should start younger. And for folks who have had several people in the family with colon cancer, we can start as young as 20. So we have, all of us in medicine have been advocating as hard as we can that folks should be screened for this disease. And for a number of years I was on Katie Couric's advisory board for her foundation, and Katie did just a tremendous job of publicizing the importance of screening for colon cancer. When she had her colonoscopy on air, there was what was called in the medical literature the Couric effect, where the number of colonoscopies skyrocketed across the country. All that being said, we recognize that there are some people who we just, for one reason or another, have not engaged in colonoscopy screening. It does require, a day and a half. There's a half-day prep ahead of time, and then you have to be off work for the day of the colonoscopy because of the sedation. You can't drive, so it takes two people. So there is a hurdle to get folks to do this test, and in some cases insurance coverage isn't perfect, and there may be co-pays. So the best test, as we've always said, is the one that gets used. So that was really the impetus for those of us in the field to try to think of, could we find other tests that might be more patient-friendly than colonoscopy? And my team really had the privilege of pioneering the use of stool DNA testing. So we developed the original chemistry that showed that you could find altered DNA in the stools of patients with colon cancers. And we brought that forward. We partnered with a biotechnology company, Exact Sciences, and that came onto the market as a product called ColoSure. And it was the first of the stool DNA tests that became available for widespread clinical use. And it really pioneered the chemistry for being able to recognize these abnormal DNAs, and it was the immediate predecessor of the test that now many folks know about, which is Cologuard, which is the second generation test from Exact Sciences that used the chemistry we developed and then added some additional opportunities to it to detect cancers in additional complementary ways. So we take a lot of pride in having been able to help develop that field, pioneer that field, and we really hope that it does result in more folks being screened than we were able to do when the only alternative out there was colonoscopy. That being said, colonoscopy is still the ultimate gold standard, and I certainly don't want to encourage anyone not to have a colonoscopy.
Absolutely. And talking about colon cancer, but also a cancer that's on the rise, the esophageal cancer becoming such a problem. Can you discuss that and also the test you've developed?
Yeah, we thought we should cover both ends. So esophageal, we became interested in esophageal cancer a little bit by accident, actually. That's the The beauty of research is you start out looking to answer one question, and sometimes you discover you're answering a second question. So when we were developing the chemistry that we used for the colon cancer test, we always saw there were a couple cases of folks we were picking up that didn't have colon cancer. We wondered why that might be. So we started to look if we were picking up cancers elsewhere in the gut. And much to our surprise, we discovered the chemistry we developed worked even better in the esophagus than it did in the colon. So we started to look at the esophagus and esophageal cancers more seriously. And what we realized was that the esophageal cancer is just a damnable problem. This is a cancer that's really this particular type of cancer, esophageal adenocarcinoma, is a cancer of the esophagus that shows up down right at the spot where the esophagus meets the stomach. And it's a cancer that I don't think I ever saw a case of when I was in medical school, but it's skyrocketed in the last 3 decades. It's been the fastest increasing cause of cancer death in American adults. It's up over 7-fold over the last 30 years. And now it's killing more adults than an ovarian cancer. So it's just an enormous public health problem. We don't talk about it anywhere near as much as we talk about some of the other diseases. But it shares, like pancreatic cancer, it's among the most lethal of all cancers. Less than 20% of people who develop it will survive 5 years, because it's by the time you have symptoms, which are trouble swallowing most typically, the disease is usually spread. So like colon cancer, in the colon, the cancers arise from colon polyps. So the beauty of colonoscopy is if you go in and find those polyps and take them out, you can prevent the colon cancers. In the esophagus, these esophageal cancers arise from something called Barrett's esophagus, which is a change in the lining of the lining of the esophagus right down there by the stomach. So instead of the lining looking like esophagus, it starts to look like intestine. And this Barrett's esophagus is really insidious. It doesn't have any symptoms. And yet, it's the first step toward developing these esophageal cancers. So there's this epidemic of millions of people that are walking around with Barrett's esophagus who are at much elevated risk for esophageal cancer who don't know it, because we don't usually test for it. Occasionally, somebody will get an endoscopy, which is the only real way up till very recently to test for it, where a gastroenterologist will put a periscope through the mouth and look with a light all the way down into the stomach. And sometimes folks who have enough heartburn will have an endoscopy done and Barrett's may be found. But typically these days, antacids are available over the counter. Proton pump inhibitors, drugs that'll shut off stomach acid, are available over the counter. A lot of folks just medicate their heartburn. And again, because endoscopy requires a day off work, sedation, 2 people, somebody to drive you to and from the test, it's not a test that's used that frequently just because somebody has some heartburn. So the result of that is that when you look at folks who actually develop the cancers, all of whom had Barrett's to begin with, 90% of the time no one ever knew there was Barrett's there. Right. So there was this huge window where you could have prevented the cancer from ever developing, and yet we don't have a good way to test for it. So we have a wonderful team here at Case School of Medicine and University Hospitals, Seidman Cancer Center. I'm a medical oncologist by training, and I have 2 great colleagues, Joe Willis, who's a GI pathologist, and Amitabh Chak, who's head of our endoscopy group. And we get together pretty frequently, and we were talking about this problem. And we thought, gee, we should take a look at that chemistry from the colon and see if it worked in the esophagus. And much to our surprise, it worked even better in the esophagus than it did in the colon. So we realized we had a DNA test that could pick up these Barrett's esophagus, but we didn't have a way to get to the esophagus without the endoscope, which was, of course, the whole point. So necessity is the mother of invention. We realized we needed to find a way to get to the esophagus. So we teamed up with some engineering folks And we wound up with this little swallowable balloon. It's about the size of a vitamin pill. And you can swallow it down. I like to say it's a vitamin pill on a pasta noodle. It goes right down to the stomach, and it goes to the stomach in less than 3 minutes. Then you can put a little air in through the little plastic tether that it's on, and that pops the balloon out. It lets you just gently touch that spot in the lower esophagus where the Barrett's can show up. And then you can take the air out. Now the balloon collapses, and you've got a clean catch of what that lower esophagus sample looked like, and it's protected now because the balloon's in a capsule. And you can just fish it out through the throat. Folks find it pretty comfortable. And we found that when we combined this balloon device, which sort of something that looks like it should be in a Cracker Jack box almost, it's just this little squishy balloon. We found when we combined that with our DNA chemistry that we could pick up over 90% of the folks that had the Barrett's. And we brought it into clinical trials at university hospitals and over at the Cleveland Clinic, and we were grateful to both institutions for supporting that effort. We're able to show the accuracy of the test was over 90%. And just last month, the FDA approved the balloon device. So that will soon be available to physicians to use for patients. And we are just now going through the process with a larger multi-center trial, hospitals all across the country, to create the replication, the repeat of the DNA chemistry so that the FDA can take a look at that and hopefully approve it as well.
Fantastic.
So it's early going yet, but we're hoping that this will change the way we care for folks at risk for esophageal cancers, and ultimately lead to our being able to stamp out this disease.
Absolutely. You and your team have worked so long on these particular issues. When you think about the future, maybe the next 5 to 10 years, what are some things you hope to be able to see in this field?
Well, globally, I think that cancer prevention and early detection of cancer is one of the great unmet needs in medicine. We understandably and justifiably put tremendous effort into improving cancer treatment, but it's awfully hard after the horse is out of the barn, right, to track down all the places it's been, and that's what you have to do to cure a cancer. We do tremendously better at treating cancer and prolonging people's lives, and in some cases curing the disease, than we did when I started out as a medical oncologist. But if we could catch these cancers early before they spread, we could save so many more lives. So, the holy grail, I think, for all of us in cancer research is simple tests, simple blood tests, simple esophagus tests, simple stool tests, tests that could catch these diseases early, right? At a time when you could just cut them out or take them out before they've ever spread, and not get ourselves into the question of, okay, now that we've got someone who's got disease in many, many places all through their body, how do we mop it up and how do we cure them?
Right. I was listening to a lecture you gave, and you were referring back to earlier in your career, but you mentioned a particular patient, I believe it was an accountant that maybe was 33 years old,
Yeah.
and he was dying of metastatic colon cancer, I believe. And you said he told you that his father had died of the same thing. Can you talk about it, in your clinical practice, when you're meeting with patients, you see the human side of things? How has that driven you in the hard work that you're putting in?
It motivates me, and it motivates every member of our team every day to come in and give 110%. When you've cared for people, when you've taken them through illness, and when you've watched them die, and when you've faced their family, you never want to have to see that again. And the particular family you're talking about played just a seminal role in all the work I've done. This was a family from Illyria, as you said, that inherited a genetic susceptibility to colon cancer. And it was really just, I think I was only 2 years out of training, just come to Cleveland when I met that young 33-year-old man. And he had incurable cancer when we met, and what he wanted was for me to do something for his kids, right? Because his grandfather had died of this disease, his father had died of it, he had it young. It was very clear there was something being inherited in that family that could cause colon cancer. And at the time I met him, there were a few families like that that had been described in the medical literature. They were largely the work of Henry Lynch, just a pioneer who had barnstormed all through the country looking for families like this. And it's in Henry's honor that this disease is now called Lynch syndrome, but Lynch syndrome wasn't in the medical textbooks at the time. Most people weren't sure it even existed, that it wasn't just, looking for bad luck cases. So we had the tremendous privilege of being able to be part of the team that identified that there actually was a genetic cause for Lynch syndrome, that there were specific genes that were being inherited in damaged form in these families, and that they were the cause of the disease. And we were able to work out exactly what the mechanism was by which this damaged gene caused colon cancers and endometrial cancers in women in these families. And it led to genetic testing for this disease. It led to our being able to help the children of the original family I cared for by being able to identify who did and who was at risk and who wasn't at risk. And ultimately, in the fullness of time, it's led to the development of immunotherapy that is remarkably effective at treating the cancers in these families when they do show up, but also to screening of these families. Now that you have a genetic test that can identify who's at risk, we start looking at in their 20s. And it's also changed the way we care for everybody with colon cancer, because a test that we developed is now used to pretty much test every colon cancer that's taken out by a surgeon in our hospital and in most hospitals in the country to make sure they don't have this disease. Because if you find out that now that you can test for the DNA that somebody with a colon cancer actually has Lynch syndrome, now you can look at their brothers or sisters, their kids, and you can stop anybody else from ever getting the disease. So it's been hugely influential in motivating our team, hugely influential in setting the course of the work that I've done. When I was in training, when I was a medical intern in Chicago, the University of Chicago, my dad had colon cancer in his late 50s. So I had a very personal sense of what it's like for a family when somebody gets this diagnosis, a strong desire to try to do something that could make an impact, and to be able to see in the fullness of time what we've been able to do to help has been very gratifying.
Absolutely. I should ask you a little bit just about the Cleveland connection.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the advantage to doing this work in a city like Cleveland with this unique medical ecosystem.
Cleveland's just been a wonderful place. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I don't talk about that during a football season. And then went to school and went to Harvard for college and Yale for medical school. And did my internship and residency at the University of Chicago, and then was at the National Cancer Institute, the NCI, for medical oncology. Cleveland was my first job out of training. So I've been here over 30 years now. And it's really been an essential part of why we've been able to succeed. The institutions that I've been part of, Case School of Medicine, university hospitals, now the Seidman Cancer Center, really have a dedication to trying to do things that can improve a lot of patients with disease. And that dedication translates into helping to raise support for the kind of work that I do, helping to find other like-minded individuals to be here so that we have the teams of people, because you need big teams to do these kind of studies, so that you have the teams of folks to work with. And most of all, to giving physicians, scientists like me the freedom to pretty much do what we want to do, right? Because medical research is always a bit of a gamble. You're always rolling the dice. Otherwise it wouldn't be research. You'd know what you were doing. Research is what you do when you don't know what you're doing. So you have to be at a place that kind of has some faith in you, that it'll all work out. And for me, the support that I've received over the years here, both from Case and from university hospitals, has been remarkable. And additionally, this is just a spectacular medical town with a lot of cooperation between the institutions, and we've been able to work together with investigators at the Cleveland Clinic for studies to be able to draw on patients from both institutions, and that reflects the nature of the Case Cancer Center, which is an umbrella that involves all the hospitals in town. So this is just a very cooperative city. Not a lot of, we don't have a lot of prima donnas in town. We have folks who want to make a difference, and it shows in the work in the quality of the work that people here are able to achieve.
Wonderful. Well, we have a lot of good material that we've gone over. Is there anything maybe you'd care to add that I didn't ask you about?
Just, I think, to reiterate that I'm grateful and humbled by the recognition that this award confers, but it shouldn't be recognition of me. It's recognition of a team, of a body of work that I've been able to be part of, but whose success really reflects the friends, the colleagues, the collaborators, the students, the trainees that I've been privileged to work with.